Okay, so if you were to ask anyone, what is the absolute most direct path to Canadian permanent residence? I bet they might guess it's about having some fancy university degree or landing a really specific high-paying job offer. But the actual truth? It's family sponsorship. And what makes this pathway so incredibly special is that it completely bypasses those highly competitive points-based systems like express entry. It doesn't require a job offer at all, and it doesn't rank you against a pool of other applicants based on your work experience. Instead, the whole thing relies entirely on having a genuine family relationship.
So our roadmap today follows 5 very clear steps. 1. Who qualifies for sponsorship? 2. The step-by-step timeline. 3. Gathering your essential documents. 4. Budgeting for government fees. And finally, 5. Avoiding common application mistakes.
Before we even start the engine here, we have to really understand the dynamic between 2 very distinct people in this process. Side A. That's the sponsor. This is the person who is already established in Canada and is the one driving the application forward. Then you have side B, the sponsored person. That's your family member who is coming along for the ride to get their permanent residence. And both sides absolutely have to meet very specific rules for this whole thing to work out.
Let's look at the sponsor's requirements first. To sponsor someone, you've got to be at least 18 years old, and you must be either a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. Generally speaking, you also need to actually live in Canada. But honestly, here is the most critical part, the financial support undertaking. When you sponsor a family member, you are signing a strict legal agreement with the Canadian government. You're basically promising to provide for that person's basic needs. We're talking food, clothing, housing, utilities, the whole shebang. To put that into perspective, if you sponsor your spouse and they later end up needing to go on non-disability social assistance, well, you as the sponsor are legally on the hook to repay the government every single dollar. It's a huge commitment. Also, you can't be bankrupt, you can't be in default of any previous sponsorships, and you definitely can't be behind on court-ordered child support.
So, on the flip side, who can actually be sponsored? Well, spousal sponsorship is by far the most common. This includes legally married spouses or common law partners. And just to clarify, common law means you've lived together in a marriage-like relationship continuously for at least 12 months. It also includes dependent children. Now, you'll see parents and grandparents are on this list too, but they fall under a very specific, limited intake program. To sponsor parents or grandparents, the sponsor actually has to prove they meet a minimum income requirement for multiple years before they can even apply. And since it is a limited intake, if you don't get selected, you might want to look into the super visa for extended visits instead. So just to wrap up this first section, meeting these baseline eligibility rules for both the sponsor and the applicant is your absolute foundation.
Moving right along to Section 2, the step-by-step timeline. Let's navigate the processing route.
Once you know for sure that you're eligible, the very next question is almost always, okay, how long is this actually going to take? For spouses, common law partners, and dependent children, a fully complete application usually takes about 12 months. However, for parents and grandparents, once that application is actually accepted for processing, you're looking at more like 24 months. But please remember, these are just averages. Every single case is totally different based on the volume of applications the government is handling, and crucially, whether your paperwork is absolutely perfect from day one.
Let's walk through this chronological roadmap for a typical spousal sponsorship, just to give you an idea. Day 1 is when your fully complete application is submitted. By months 1 or 2, you should hear back from the government. Between months 2 and 6, the sponsor gets reviewed and the sponsored person will be asked to provide fingerprints and photos, which we call biometrics, as well as do their medical exams. Then months 4 to 10 are usually the longest stretch. This is the waiting game, where officers thoroughly check background, security, and the genuineness of the relationship itself. Finally, around months 10 to 12, a final decision is made. And hey, here's a really great tip. If you are a spouse applying from inside Canada, you might actually be eligible to apply for an open work permit while you wait for this whole process to finish. That's a real game changer.
Now, you might hear the term Acknowledgement of Receipt, or AOR, tossed around a lot. Let's just translate that bureaucratic jargon into plain English right now. AOR is simply the official confirmation from the Immigration Department saying, hey, we got it, your application is complete, and processing has officially begun. It is basically your very first big milestone on this timeline.
All right, Section 3, gathering your essential documents. Time to pack your paperwork luggage.
You can't go on a big trip without your luggage, right? And for this journey, your luggage is your paperwork. Listen, a marriage certificate alone just isn't enough to prove a genuine relationship. You really have to follow the show, don't tell rule here to prove to immigration officers that your relationship wasn't just created for immigration purposes. You need to provide a really rich variety of evidence. We're talking shared leases or mortgages, joint bank accounts, utility bills with both of your names on them, wedding photos, travel records showing you actually visited each other, screenshots of your daily chat logs, and even support letters from family and friends. The richer the story your documents tell, the much stronger your application is going to be.
Alongside all the romance and relationship proof, you obviously need the mandatory background documents too. You're going to need valid passports and birth certificates. You'll also need police clearance certificates from any countries the applicant has lived in, just to prove criminal admissibility. And you'll need an immigration medical exam done by an approved physician to ensure there's no medical inadmissibility. Be sure to keep all your payment receipts. And this is absolutely crucial. If any document you submit is not in English or French, you must provide certified translations following strict government procedures. Don't skip that step. So to recap this section, overwhelming the officers with organized, authentic proof is hands down the best way to keep your case moving smoothly.
Next up, Section 4, Budgeting for Government Fees. Let's understand the financial toll.
Let's look at this breakdown for an example spousal application so you know what to expect. The main government sponsorship, processing, and right of permanent residence fee comes to around 1,260 Canadian dollars. Then add an $85 biometrics fee. After that, you have your third-party costs, usually around $200 to $500 for the medical exam, depending on what country you're in, plus costs for police certificates, photos, and potentially those translations we just talked about. Here's a pro tip for you. A lot of applicants choose to pay that right of permanent residence fee up front, right at the very beginning. Doing that can actually avoid processing delays later on. So if you do this entirely yourself without hiring a lawyer or a consultant, a safe estimated budget to have ready is around $1,700 to $2,000 Canadian dollars for a spouse. But what if you have a larger family?
Well, if you are adding dependent children to the mix, you need to keep this number in mind. It's an additional 180 Canadian dollars for every single dependent child you include. And here's kind of a surprising fact. Canada generally considers children up to the age of 22 as dependents, which means older students can often be included right in your application. That pretty much covers the baseline finances you need to prepare for before you move forward.
Finally, we've reached Section 5, Avoiding Common Application Mistakes. Let's steer clear of the potholes. You've got your roadmap, you've got your budget. Now let's make sure we avoid the potholes that cause super frustrating delays or even outright refusals. Sending incomplete forms or just forgetting a simple signature, that will get your application bounced right back to you. Providing weak relationship evidence, like say only submitting a few recent selfies and absolutely nothing else, that raises major red flags for the officers. Inconsistent dates across your different forms will definitely lead to extra scrutiny. And remember those background checks? Issues with criminal or medical inadmissibility or just letting your passports or medical exams expire during the waiting period are massive hurdles. Lastly, if the government reaches out and asks you for an additional document, failing to respond quickly will completely pause your entire process. So double-check everything and always, always keep copies of absolutely every single page you submit.
Now, perhaps the biggest hidden pothole of them all is failing to keep your information current. I mean, the process takes a year or sometimes more, and life happens. But if you move, if you get a new phone number, if you get married, or if you have a baby during that time, you must update the immigration authorities immediately. Proactive communication and complete honesty throughout this process are completely non-negotiable. But listen, if you follow the roadmap, if you budget properly, and if you avoid those potholes, here is the straightforward finish line waiting for you. Once approved, the sponsored person receives their confirmation of permanent residence. They complete any final formalities, which happens either at the border if they're traveling from outside Canada, or internally if they are already inside the country, and boom, they officially become a Canadian permanent resident.
And let's take a second to celebrate what that actually means. Look at these rights. The sponsor person can now live and work literally anywhere in Canada for almost any employer. They can access provincial healthcare, they can study at Canadian institutions, and eventually, if they meet the residency requirements down the line, they can even apply for full Canadian citizenship. It really is a completely life-changing outcome. Make sure you go to the official Canadian immigration website today to verify the absolute latest updates and requirements.